Hello students, so we just finished that video on the Boston Massacre, and it was a pretty good video, pretty historically accurate, and it showed the tension very well, and you could feel it when you're watching the video. It's uncomfortable, and it's been over 200 years, but these situations are still somewhat frequent. Just watch the news on a weekly basis. And just as with modern incidents of civil protests turning violent, there are always multiple versions of events. There's the way it happened and the way people say it happened, depending on, their beliefs. So often the story changes depending on who's telling it. You can see that if something happens, you switch from one news channel to the other. So the same thing happened with the Boston Massacre. In that case, the name tells it all. It wasn't called the Boston Accident. It wasn't called the Boston Riot, or it was the Boston Massacre. And colonial leaders, patriots, elaborated and spread news of the event in a way that demonized the British. They basically used it as anti-British propaganda, and they actually drummed up enough support by using this event as propaganda to get the Townshend Acts that we learned about in the last lesson repealed. And then with that repealed, the colonial boycott of British goods ended, with the exception of one product, tea, which we'll learn about momentarily. Right now I want to point out this was actually like an inscribing on a metal plate done by Paul Revere, the guy who rides the horse and yells, "The British are coming, the British are coming." He was a silversmith, and he did this engraving depicting the bloody massacre at Boston. You can see all the colonial people look pretty much like victims, and then there's these terrible, evil British guys. But it does not show that, hey, one dude got clubbed in the face. There were snowballs with rocks hitting them being thrown at them. It was a pretty bad situation for those British soldiers. So it's really ultimately up to an act of opinion as whether or not you thought they were justified in what happened. But moving on to this Tea Party event. Well, it's not that kind of tea party. The British East India Company was a company that was a vital part of the English economy, and it was getting crushed by the colonial boycott of tea. They were in the business of selling tea, and the colonies refused to buy it. As a result, they were doing poorly. To help out the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act. This act actually lowered the cost of tea for colonists, but basically gave total control of the tea market to the East India Company. In simple terms, they made the tea cheap so the colonists would buy it, but they made it so that they could only buy it from the East India Company. And they thought they would bite on that, but it made the colonists super mad anyways, because they didn't like being told what to do. At this point, pretty much anything Britain did made the colonists angry. So East India ships start bringing tea to the colonies, but there are oftentimes, as in the case with Philadelphia and New York City, such opposition that the boats had to turn back and couldn't anchor and unload their tea. In the case of Boston, Massachusetts, you have an event called the Boston Tea Party. What happened, it was a cold night of 1773. It was December, and 3 ships full of tea sat anchored in Boston Harbor at the docks. The Boston chapter of the Sons of Liberty we talked about, they dressed as Indians, kind of, roughly, and snuck aboard the ships and dumped all the tea into the harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party, and it was celebrated as a bold act throughout the colonies. However, the consequences of this event would be far-reaching. Here we have a depiction of the Boston Tea Party. So when word of the Boston Tea Party reached the King of Britain, King George III, he knew it was time to crack down hard on the colonists. What Britain called the coercive acts were passed. Now, to coerce means sort of to force somebody to do what you want them to do. In the colonies, and indeed in our history books, the coercive acts are typically referred to as the intolerable acts because the colonists found them intolerable. It's the worst. So, let's talk about these acts. They were pretty Massachusetts-centric, as that's where the Boston Tea Party occurred, Boston, Massachusetts. But the first one applied to all the colonies as a punishment for supporting this action. It was called the Quartering Act, and it forced colonists to allow British soldiers to live among them, like in their house. That would be like the government sending you a letter and being like, hey, listen, you have to house this soldier guy that you don't know. And maybe even worse, because remember, the colonists for the most part didn't like the redcoats. So like maybe now you'd be like, well, all right, I guess as long as he's nice, stay along, because generally here in America we like our soldiers. But imagine it was a foreign soldier, or what you considered to be a foreign soldier. So people very much did not like that. No more town hall meetings allowed in the colony of Massachusetts. Technically, I read that they were allowed to have one a year. But basically, this was made so that they couldn't get together and cause trouble, have meetings on how to mess with the British next. Boston Harbor was closed until the tea that was dumped was paid for. That means nothing in, nothing out, and that can cause problems because that was a main source of money for a lot of people. And another one not mentioned in the book is, but still pretty important, was that all the trials that were supposed to happen in Massachusetts were now be done in England with a British judge. This is bad because a lot of these things under trial were things done like smuggling, things done that colonists generally approved of that Britain did not, and if they were tried in Britain with a British judge, then it was going to be bad times for the colonists. As you may well imagine, these intolerable acts did not really improve the relations between England and its colonies, and that's really going to result in more problems, which we'll talk about in the next lesson. For now, let's hit up our assignment. It's a little bit different. We're doing a discussion today. Over the past few lessons, we've learned a good deal about the lead-ups to the revolution, sort of a cause and effect, where things slowly got worse. There'd be some kind of new tax or policy Britain would implement, and the colonists would get mad and boycott something, or tar and feather tax collectors, or throw tea into the harbor, stuff like that. What I want you to do today is tell me if you think the colonists were being, overreacting and or being unreasonable. So here's what I want to see in your post. You can just hit reply here. I want you to make the post saying whether or not you thought the colonists were justified in their anger or not. Then provide one event that supports your opinion, drawing from either lesson 1 or lesson 2 of this chapter. This will be worth 10 points. I actually made the first post. It will be an example. So I wrote that I think the anger of the colonists was justified, and I could have done either or opinion, so I don't think that just because Mr. Young said it was justified, you have to put that. I could have done either or. But in this example, I said they were justified, for example, with the Sugar Act. That actually lowered the tax on molasses, but also allowed officers to seize goods without going to court. And that's a pretty significant breach of rights. That would be like you downloaded an illegal copy of Civil War, Captain America movie, on your Xbox, and then the government comes and they take your Xbox. They never give it back. They never plan on giving it back. You're never getting your Xbox back, and there was no trial. They just took it. And there goes your Xbox forever. I know you'd be very upset. I would be upset if they seized my property and I couldn't get it back. So I thought in that case the anger was justified. But you might say, like I think the Boston Massacre should have never happened. Those colonists shouldn't have hit that soldier with a club in the head. Or, I don't know why they're so upset about the Tea Act. So what if you only had one brand of tea to buy? At least it was cheap. You could really go any way with this. Just make sure you tell me if you think they were being unreasonable or justified. And then give me an example to support your opinion. And that's it. That's your assignment for the day. If you need any help, please come see me. Give me a call or a message. And as always, have a wonderful day.